Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here. I'm looking through all my old art books and Renaissance texts and artist sketchbooks, trying to get ideas for cool things to talk about. And this is a really weird book. I think I may give away because it's entirely in German with no translation. I've held on to it for a while. I got it because of the gimmicky op cover where I was going, woo, I'm tripping out. Hotel California, Desiree Dolron and Thomas Reedy. You can still find this on Amazon, but you'd have to pay full price for it. So I wouldn't get this unless you are a completely fluent in reading German. Man, actually looking at it on the screen is better than looking at it in real life, where I can barely make out the words. So anyway, since it is in German, I'm going to skip over whatever the essays are. One of the things that's interesting about it is just looking at the pictures. I have a feel for what the exhibition this was based on was. I think it was an exhibition about combining contemporary photography with German Renaissance prints and medieval paintings of saints being tortured. And so the idea would be like, oh, there's imagery of pain and suffering throughout human history, right? So the connection isn't a single century or a single group of artists. The connection they're making is something about human suffering. So guess I better give you a summa triggerum, a trigger warning. If you are at all squeamish by saints being tortured or something, or photographs of war, there's some of that in this book, even though it's in the context of a fine art gallery. If you're at all squeamish about that, this is your chance to get out of here. Summa triggerum, summa tangentum, summa spoilerum. So one of the unfortunate things about this book is they don't name the artists underneath the photos, which means if I wanted to, I haven't had time to memorize all these names, which means if I wanted to tell you all the names right away, I'd have to be like flipping back and forth, back and forth. This book stand, by the way, has a really cool little book holder for me. But what I think will be easier is if I just give you some quick observations on the art, and then I'll just use this bibliography to look up these artists later and see if I get any ideas for more in-depth videos on any of them. So the first set of photos are these photos of this weird little, it looks like a resort with fancy little boat rides or track rides and such. And these are juxtaposed with I would guess, early German Renaissance prints of the creation of Adam. And let me think. The point I'm trying to make is, even though I don't know the artists or the movement that inspired these, just looking at this art can give you tons of stuff. And a big theme of this channel I'm trying to push is you have no excuse to be a lazy artist. You have no excuse to be uninspired. The trick to being a good artist is to not sit around and just be bored and sad and mope around and wait for inspiration to strike you. It's to cultivate the kinds of habits so that you can draw anything at any time and have the opposite problem. Have the problem of having too much awesome stuff you could draw or work on because there's so much awesome stuff in the world. And if you looked at a book like this, I don't know, you could look at these guys and then boom, here's 20 crazy monsters who could show up in your comic book story to fight the hero. So let's look at some of the stuff that God is creating in the Garden of Eden here. So we've got this wide variety of birds, but their wings are kind of more dragon-like than a real bird. There's a straight-up real dragon. Let's see if I can get that to focus. There's a straight-up real dragon right there. And the sea life. Okay, so sort of octopus frills, a seal head, and this sort of, what do you call it? Like one of those crabs, one of those really primitive kinds of crab-like life forms from the bottom of the ocean. This one's got more of a fish body, but like a hawk head. These whales, but their blowholes aren't just spouting up a big thing into the air. They're blowing it forward like they've got a frill, and the fins are right on the side of their head, and they've got these little spiny teeth. Gosh, that one's got like a boar teeth, and it looks like fur. And these little dragons have little fishy tails going up. There's what looks like a seal, swordfish, but they're extra elongated. This one's got pretty much straight up a boar's head and giant scales and a little one horn on the back. Lobsters. Wow, those are nuts. Those are nuts. I love it. And then I think what the point of this was supposed to be was they were making some sort of juxtaposed idea, like, oh, this is like its own little private paradise, and here's ancient art of paradise. So I was mostly interested in this kind of stuff. So I would guess this is probably God giving Adam and Eve the command to go be fruitful and multiply. Lots of animal life here. These aren't quite as nutty as some of the aquatic forms of life, but they're a little bit off. And I think the reason for that is if you didn't have a zoo, or you couldn't go to the library and look up a bunch of pictures of lions, you'd have to go with a verbal description of lions. That's what Albrecht Dürer had to do for his famous print of a rhinoceros. And what's incredible about Dürer's print of a rhinoceros is it's off, but it looks like it could be a real rhinoceros, and he probably drew it based only on a verbal description. There's another nutty form of water life where it's got two blowholes blowing back and a giant mouth. A little teeny tiny sun with a face in it. Sweet. I learned, I've forgotten what the specific meanings are, but I learned from one of my Italian Renaissance history specialist teachers that halos have certain symbolic meanings. So Christ before the crucifixion will have a different halo than Christ after the resurrection, and God the Father will have a different halo than Christ will. This is a bit like triangular halos I've seen in Italian paintings for God the Father, kind of a triangle to help represent the Trinity, but this isn't exactly a triangle. It's more of a star shape or a Trinity symbol transformed into a halo, and he's got the whole world in his hands. Okay, he's surrounded by light, and there's a whole heavenly host surrounding him. I don't see as many crazy kooky animals, but look, there's tiny little babies inside this wall of light surrounding him. Like what? All the future children that are going to come into the world? That's nuts. And there's Adam and Eve down below. So this one wasn't quite as kooky. I can't read the Latin, so I'm not going to worry about that for now. Oh, this one. Golly, this is a much more naturalistic representation. Wow. When I talk about stiff art, this is the opposite of stiff art. Let's see if I can get that to focus. All right, I might just have to zoom out a little bit. So first off, the serpent has a very elongated snout like a dragon and a sinister expression, and he's wrapping Eve in darkness. It's like a symbolic representation of his influence on Eve as he's deceived her. She doesn't seem to be holding fruit. It looks like she's just holding Adam's hand, and she's actually holding the fig leaf, which makes this a PG-rated work. I love that the chia is just looking at us like, oh, don't be stupid. Stupid humans, what you doing? Oh, the shading. Okay, so what's my point? This is pre-comic art. This is before the Western comic market existed. And we're seeing here the use of line, but such a subtle use of line that the form is indicated as if it were shaded. This feels like a painting, but if you were to zoom in all the way, you could see all the little black and white lines that make it up. It's nuts, and you couldn't do this for comics because this single image was probably the work of several months of fine detail work to get this total effect. Just gorgeous. This is absolutely incredible. So Dürer's my favorite of the German Renaissance. I mean, he's the most famous one, but a lot of German artists from this period, I think they were as good as the Italian Renaissance artists, but they might have had a little bit more of down-to-earth quality to what they did. So Eve's got kind of like this, plain girl look to her face. It's not overly idealized. She looks like a real person. Adam looks like sort of a, hairy dude you might run into on the college campus. If you saw that guy, you'd say, wow, that's one beautiful man, but he looks like a real man. And that's the opposite of the anime manga problem, where you only draw one kind of face and one kind of face only. Sometimes the medieval or Renaissance art characters, they look a little odd, maybe they look a little plain or funny looking, but they always look like a type of person. This one I think might be illustrative of how a lot of women from this type of period, they might have drawn their head as a big egg shape. So if in our day, like a lot of pretty girls look like anime girls, in this day and age, a lot of pretty girls look like they had this sort of egg head shape to them. So this would be the angel, with the sword guarding the Garden of Eden as Adam and Eve are cast out. I didn't notice any really weird, crazy creatures, but there's the serpent down there being condemned to crawl on its belly. I like this stone going up as Adam's stumbling forward. That's a great kind of counterbalance, energy going that way, energy going that way. It's tense. And then here's this like weird theme park thing juxtaposed with it. This looks like something out of a Wile E. Coyote cartoon. This one reminds me of Scott McCloud's book, Understanding Comics, where he tries to argue that comics have been around since ancient times, which is kind of an interesting idea, but it's a little bit of a stretch. So this is an example of what Scott McCloud would call sequential time in a single image, where here's Adam and Eve over here getting cast out of the garden, and here's Adam and Eve over here in the same picture, living their life. Eve has a child. She's suffering childbirth, terrible pain in childbirth. Adam has to work and toil to build the house and to grow food. So they're suffering the consequences of the fall. I love how they're both framed. Adam framed by the construction he's doing, Eve framed by this door. Fantastic. Fantastic. I think Scott McCloud deserves his own whole video or series of videos, though, so I'm going to save that tangent for another time. When I wrote my thesis on comic art history, Scott McCloud's name came up a lot, and most of the scholars in comics were roasting the heck out of Scott McCloud. And I think he even acknowledged this in his second book, how his thesis was controversial. Some more photos of weird little things. I'm not going to talk about every single one of these. So a nice Madonna. Another what looks like a Madonna to me, maybe during the flight to Egypt. Heavenly hosts. What might be et vitam aeternam, amen, so, and life everlasting, amen, so paradise, a representation of the Father, which would be very Catholic. This probably ain't Protestant, this is probably pre-Martin Luther, and the controversy over the representation of God in art. That was an absolutely fascinating thing to look at, to learn about. I can't wait to dig into that more. And then here's a weird collection of photos of like really over-the-top expressions, some sort of like soy boy wise, but some really good expressions too. But since I can't read the essays, I've got no clue what this series was supposed to be. All right, so this is what I was kind of doing my trigger warning about, because so they've got like these photos of like war imagery, I'm guessing, in Death and Destruction, combined with paintings, German paintings of like hell and the torment of the damned. So I think they were doing like a bit where they were saying, see, here's some new photos, here's some ancient paintings. Don't they have an interesting, similar theme to them? I see that, but I'm mostly going to try to talk about the paintings. So let's look at these crazy demons. Like this one's got blue fur and long little bat ears and what looks like a red cloak. And then there's one up here you can barely see because it's so dark, but it's got two giant teeth and an arm coming right out from underneath its neck and what looks like a giant wing draped down over its head. And then all the people are suffering torment. They're getting poked. This lady's getting bit. Ouch. I would not want to go there. Okay, this is a really good image, this photo, and it's sad because it looks like dead horses, maybe from a scene of war, contrasted with a this is pre-Renaissance. You can tell by how the proportions and not the proportions, the perspective and the stiffness. So let's see here. This is a medieval artist who is aware of perspective. He is aware that things are smaller in the distance. So what would this be? Would this be maybe like shortly after Giotto? I'm guessing. I'll look that up later when I go into geek mode. So this would be not early medieval art. This would be kind of like right on that transition period between very flat medieval art where there's no perspective yet and Renaissance art where there was a really carefully defined science to drawing in perspective. And it was a slow build of learning how to do that. And this has got to be St. George and the Dragon. Let's look at this dragon. Wow, it's got giant red lion paws sticking right out of the bottom of its lizard tail and a nice long neck and pointy ears, and it's eating a bunch of people. Sick. She's just in the distance watching, digging this. Wow. Yeah, ladies, don't you dig that? A real He-Man there. Wow. And then some photos of like weird rituals and stuff. Oh, I don't even want to show all this. A saint being flayed, and I don't remember my saints very well, but I could probably look that up later. More kind of graphic images. Some decapitation, some war, some weird ritual stuff. Yeah, so like there, see can you see how they're, by combining these, they're sort of doing a bit like, oh hey, this is religious and it's about pain and suffering. This is religious and this is about pain and suffering. I'm sure the essay would have some sort of very intellectual explanation for why they chose the images they did. But I'm just going to focus on what really interests me. So I'm guessing this would be kind of like a martyr. Oh gosh, this would be like a martyr scenes. A guy's getting disemboweled and a bunch of people are falling on top of trees. There's this really crazy landscape to it where they're clearly just making up crazy shapes and like pushing it to the max. Like I doubt that the artist went out and saw a cliffside like that. They probably composed this crazy cliffside compositionally from within a studio. Man, more martyrs getting tangled up. This is so creepy to look at. Trying to remember what else really struck me. This one. So this is a flat golden sky. So this would be pulling over more ideas from the medieval period where gold was used to give it some visual punch, but they wouldn't paint a whole sky. So before the developments of the Renaissance and drawing things in perspective, if you couldn't paint a sky or understand how to paint a sky or what light does in space, gold was a way of giving a lot of visual punch to a two-dimensional type of picture. But this is kind of in a weird mix where that's sort of 3D, but the gold has the effect of flattening it a bit. So this is almost like 2.5D in its presentation of the characters. Oh, there's like a lady underneath there. That's nuts. I don't see any crazy monsters or anything though for inspiration. Some more medieval era. These are too small, but I'm probably not going to be able to see much detail. What the heck? I want to know who this saint was. That's got to be one heck of a story there. And look at all these robes. So you can get ideas for, like fantasy characters in awesome robes and stuff from this type of work. I keep coming back to this over and over again. Put good stuff into your imagination. Don't put just one type of thing into your imagination. Put 1,000 types of things into your imagination. And even though I couldn't read this is the type of book where I would kind of page through it quickly, and I do maybe a 30-second sketch and then move to the next page, do a 10-second sketch and move to the next page, and then that stays in my sketchbook and it stays in my mental landscape when I'm drawing from things to draw original characters later. Feed your imagination. So what I'll do is probably mine this bibliography to find like all the names of the artists and such, and if I can find any good info about them that I can actually read in my language, those might become subjects for videos later. So can't really recommend this if you can't read it, but a kind of creepy book too, now that I think about it. But so many fascinating German prints and paintings here. So I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I'm going to keep going through my library trying to find really good books to share with you guys. This was more just kind of a strange book that I thought was worth talking about just based on how weird it is. Love ya. Catch you later.